Welcome to the podcast. Today we will be talking about one of the root cause of why kids can be emotionally intense, and it's giftedness or twice exceptionality that go hand in hand. Don't worry if you have no idea what that means. We will be talking all about that, and to do that, we are having Danika as a guest. So let's welcome Danika over on the podcast. Welcome to Parenting the Intensity, where we'll talk all about how we can drop the general parenting advice that doesn't work with our emotionally intense kids anyway, and let go of the unrealistic expectations society puts on us as parents. Together, we'll find solutions and ideas that work for you and your kids. Chances are, deep down, you know what they need, but you need a little encouragement to keep going on harder days and permission to do things differently and help you fully trust that you already are a wonderful parent to your exceptional but challenging kids. Are you tired of feeling overwhelmed and uncertain when it comes to parenting your emotionally intense child? Do you often find yourself plagued with guilt, fearing that you're not doing enough to help them navigate their intense emotion? You are not alone. Many parents face these challenges and struggle to find the right path forward. But take a deep breath, there's hope. That's why I created the Parenting the Intensity community. Imagine having a clear roadmap tailored specifically to your child's unique needs and your family's reality. Picture feeling empowered and confident in your parenting, knowing that you are providing the support and understanding your child needs. It may seem like an unattainable dream right now, but I'm here to tell you that it is within reach. Come join us for our monthly group support to connect with other parents and get supported with your challenge right now. You also get one-on-one chat and audio office hours for the things that you're really not ready to share in the group, and workshop, tools, courses to help you in the process of finding that balance of parenting in a way that works for you, your child, and your family. Welcome to the podcast, Danika. I'm really glad to have you over.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to talk today.
Can you start by introducing yourself and sharing with us why you do what you do?
Yeah, so my name is Danika. So I have spent most of my career focused on supporting gifted and twice exceptional kids and their families. I grew up knowing I was gifted, and in the last couple years learned I'm twice exceptional. And I've just always been drawn to really bright kids who are having a hard time for some reason, either because they're emotionally intense or have big behaviors or struggle in school or at home. And so I've always just like really got those kids and love supporting them and helping them and their families. It's really fun for me. And it's so hard for families with gifted and twice exceptional kids to find resources that fit their
Mm-hmm.
kids. So it's really like I'm passionate about it and it's enjoyable for me to kind of spread the knowledge in that area.
Great, thank you. So we'll jump right in that topic since you already addressed it. What is twice exceptional? And I would just start to maybe before we dive into the twice exceptional, um, I think giftedness is something that is often like we think giftedness is one thing, but it's not really what it really is. So can we start by giftedness and like a bit of a clarifying what it is so we are all on the
Sure.
same basis?
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I'll say there's really not consensus in the giftedness field about the definition of giftedness either. But so, and actually, like the way I think about giftedness is really in terms of a like someone who's gifted has kind of an unusually high ability or potential in certain areas. And
Mhm.
usually it's like really advanced verbal skills or very advanced reasoning and thinking and problem solving skills. It can also be really strong visual spatial reasoning skills, almost like engineering abilities, or really strong quantitative reasoning abilities. And like every gifted person has like really strong abilities or potential in one of those areas. And so giftedness can be associated, I think like what what's hard for parents about identifying giftedness in their kids, and especially, right, I know your podcast is for parents with kind of intense kids.
Mhm.
Um, so I think what can be hard is like it's very hard to know that your kid is advanced because you don't usually spend that much time with other kids. And many, so it's sort of like they're just your kid. They seem
Yeah.
normal, or you may notice that they're bright, but I think a lot of parents are hesitant to call their kid gifted or to
Yep.
think if they might be because there's a lot of taboo and stigma around this idea that then you think your kid is better or it's like
Hmm.
elite in some way. So I've seen a lot of parents who are like, well, they taught themselves to read when they were 3 and they do all these things, but I don't know if they're gifted, like,
Yes.
and there's a real hesitance.
Yeah.
And I think a lot, intelligence is like highly heritable. So a lot of people with gifted kids have gifted parents who I think are also like, well, this seems normal to me. I was like this as a kid, and they might
Yeah.
not know that they themselves are also gifted.
Hmm.
Um, so
Yeah.
it could definitely be missed or hard to identify, or people may just be feel uncomfortable assuming that
Hmm.
about their kid, but it's a really useful thing to know, especially if your kid is also emotionally intense, because I think when a kid is kind of wired in an emotionally intense way and they're really gifted, it creates like a combination where they're emotionally intense and they're really good at arguing their point of view or figuring out
Yes.
a new way to do something or telling you why you're doing it wrong, or they use their very capable brain,
Hmm.
can make their intensity just manifest in a specific, specific or more challenging way sometimes.
Yeah. It kind of increase each other basically. And
Yeah,
I think what we often think about is the kids that is bright in school, like that has good
right,
grades. And I think
right,
that's not always the case.
right,
And when
right.
it's not the case, we dismiss the giftedness really fast. But
That's a good point. Yeah, especially when kids get into like elementary school.
mhm,
Right, is that a lot of gifted kids are good in school, right? And maybe very academically advanced. And giftedness and academic ability, or like IQ and academic ability, are highly correlated, but they're not the same thing.
mhm,
And so some gifted kids who are twice exceptional, have other exceptionalities that might make some school tasks hard. They might be dyslexic or have a dysgraphia or things like that where they can't perform well academically. But then also a lot of emotionally intense gifted kids, just school is not a good fit. They may even
mhm,
have really strong academic capacity or potential, but they're like, oh, this being told what to do and having to do it in the teacher's way, or like these tasks are not interesting. So they may look like they're not good in school, even though they may have very strong academic abilities because
mhm.
it's not, it's a poor fit in other ways. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's not the stereotype of like a gifted kid who's just like, I want to go to school and I want to get straight A's and I get 100 on everything and I always follow the rules. No, that's just
Yeah.
one example of what a gifted kid can look like.
Yeah. I guess that's also a gifted kids, but they're not all that way.
Yes, exactly, exactly.
So what would be the difference with a twice exceptional kids?
Yeah. So twice exceptional, if folks aren't familiar with that term, it means kind of like exceptional in two ways, with exceptional meaning like different from the norm, like an
Mhm,
exception to the rule, right? Or exception to the norm. So giftedness is one exception to the norm because that person has really advanced cognitive abilities in one area, or very strong cognitive abilities in one area. But then the other exceptionality is um, it could be any number of other exceptionalities. So really common and kind of most commonly talked about would be kids who are gifted and also autistic, or gifted and have ADHD, they're an ADHDer, gifted with sensory processing differences, gifted with a learning disability like dyslexia, dysgraphia, dyscalculia, things
mhm.
like that. Those are the most common ones that are coming to mind, but it could really be giftedness in any disability to anything that would be called a disability.
Okay.
So,
And
yeah. Yeah.
would a kids, I think that's a trick question, but would a gifted kids with anxiety be considered twice
That's
exceptional, or it's just
that's a great
part of
question.
being a gifted kid?
That's a great question. I don't think not all gifted kids are anxious. Some research has showed that gifted kids are less likely to be anxious, actually.
Okay.
Yeah, so right. I think there's like this myth of like the troubled genius that,
Mhm.
like gifted folks, but some research has shown, I think the results are mixed, but some show that gifted kids are just as likely or less likely to be anxious or depressed. Some folks consider anxiety a form of twice exceptionality. Um, I haven't in the past, although my definition of twice exceptionality keeps evolving a little bit as I keep learning more and um yeah, it's just as I learn more. So like I think about it as kind of like a recently I've been thinking about it in terms of like giftedness plus any other form of neurodivergence,
Mhm.
right? So that would be all those things I listed. That could be anxiety or depression. It could be OCD or tics or Tourette's or
Mhm.
any other way the brain is wired differently. In terms of like for practical purposes, I think it makes sense if your kid is gifted and has something that also seems to really affect them, or that they just operate differently, it's
Mhm.
useful. And
Yeah.
in my coaching work, I work with parents with emotionally intense, gifted or 2E kids, and it's like the strategies for twice exceptional 2E kids are really good for emotionally intense, gifted kids,
Yeah.
even if you don't know if they're twice exceptional, right? Or
Mhm.
they're not. It's almost like thinking of emotional intensity as um, a different way of being wired, right? So
Yeah.
they need kind of different adaptations and different supports.
Yeah. No matter the reason, basically, it's just
Right.
how it presents itself in the way
Yeah.
they react. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And so you touched on a bit on that, but like first, how would a parent know? Because we addressed the fact that some parents don't really want to say that their kids is maybe gifted, and also when there's tries exceptionality, and we've already talked about that previously, but um it camouflage each other basically.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it can be harder to spot even, and I'm
Definitely.
like I had that experience with my older kid. Like it took until they're 10 years before
Yeah.
struggles started to be enough that we like the bell was ring and there was something going on. Other like until then it was fine. So
Right.
what should we be looking for basically?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think my answer on this also evolves over time. In my work with families with emotionally intense, gifted, and twice exceptional kids, I've seen like I really think like if your kid is emotionally intense, which they probably are if you're listening to this podcast, it's really worth considering. And they're bright. If you think like, oh, they're bright or they're smart or they seem quick or they're gifted or that they have a high IQ or really strong verbal abilities, I
Hmm.
think it's worth considering that they very potentially could be twice exceptional. Like a lot of times that emotional intensity, I think, is a sign of twice exceptionality that's been unidentified.
Hmm.
And it's interesting because there's a lot of talk in giftedness spaces about gifted kids being more emotionally intense, but
Hmm.
like research has shown, like, I mean, there's not great research on all of these things, I think, but so far, like, there isn't any research that shows that gifted kids are more emotionally intense. I think it stands out a lot more, so I think there's a lot of
Hmm.
gifted kids who aren't emotionally intense who you don't really have to think about their giftedness
Yeah.
as much, or they're just kind of
Yeah.
going along,
Yeah.
um, and a lot of the families I work with, they figure out the giftedness because their kid is so intense and they're like, what's going on? Oh, this giftedness thing, this framework's really helpful for understanding my kids. But a lot of time there's also another neurodivergence or, exceptionality going on that's unidentified.
Hmm.
Um, right. So even like for myself, like I've been studying twice exceptionality. That's what all my like research was on in graduate school. So I've been studying it for over 10 years. And it's like 2 years ago, I was reading about like less obvious presentations of autism. And I was like, wait a second. Like, I did that when I was a kid. Is that a STEM? I didn't know that. Right. And it's just amazing to me because my whole life, all of my experiences were framed in terms of like, well, you're gifted. So of course you're like that. Or you're gifted. So of course
Hmm.
you're super sensitive and really quick to tears. And, all these characteristics
Yeah.
were attributed to that. But I think I'm autistic and that's what it was all along.
Yeah.
But but other exceptionalities can look really different in gifted kids. So what I would suggest for parents, I guess, is to like learn about less obvious presentations of those different exceptionalities or get curious about them, to see if those descriptions resonate with your kid. And learning from like autistic adults or adults who are ADHDers can be really helpful too, because I think
Hmm.
the stereotype of what those different kind of neurotypes look like in kids, that's usually not what it looks like in a gifted kid. And like you
Yeah.
said, the gifted kids can compensate, or, they will mask and kind of hide those characteristics, or
Hmm.
they're so bright that they're going to do well in school, even though certain things are overwhelming or stressful or don't come naturally. They
Hmm.
can kind of compensate with their intellect. So just learning about the more subtle ways that it can present can be a helpful way,
Hmm.
to get curious about, like, oh, maybe this is what's going on for my kid too. Um, because I'll say too, something tricky that happens for a lot of parents is they notice their kid is having a hard time either at home or school, or parenting feels really hard, or they know they're really emotionally reactive or intense. So they seek out an assessment, and the assessment will say, like, well, they're just gifted and anxious, right?
Hmm.
Or, oh, they're just gifted and they don't really meet criteria for anything else. But what happens is, like, a lot of psychologists and assessment providers are not trained in giftedness, so they don't really know about how things present in gifted kids or twice exceptional kids, and they're not trained in less obvious presentations of autism and ADHD and things like that. So those things get missed. And a lot of times I'll see families who have had their kids assessed like before, and I'll even read the assessment report and I'm like, from reading this, you provide enough information for me to tell your kid is probably autistic, but this person concluded that they're not because they just don't
Hmm.
know that these are those characteristics. So some
Yeah.
families, it's not until their second or third assessment that they learn their kid is twice exceptional,
Hmm.
um, which is really, it's very frustrating because it's like
Yes.
those parents are working hard, they're seeking out assessments, they're spending time and money, and they're still
Yes.
not getting the answers they need. Um, so
Yeah.
I think, so just knowing too, I think a lot of parents will have kind of like, they're like, it seems like there's something else going on with my kid, like, but I don't know what. And we went and asked this person and they said there's not, but I still think there might be. So
Hmm.
sometimes it's just parents trusting their gut too, and, looking at different resources to get the information, so they can see like, oh, this resonates with my experience.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that one is important because like I can tell you that the twice exceptional diagnosis I'm giving my kids myself because
Right. Right.
nobody will give it here for various reasons, but
Right.
I talk to enough people to know that like yeah, they're like they're ADHDers, but there's something else going on, and autistics and ADHDers, but
Right.
there's other like why do you think that we went until 12 and 13 before they were assessed? There's a reason.
Right. Right. Exactly. Exactly.
Like
Yeah.
like before them there was really not enough trouble to assess them. That's
Right.
why like just that for me is a telling, like a big telling that there's also giftedness that goes on undiagnosed basically in
Right, right. And yeah, I think a lot of times like our kids like kind of brilliance and all their skills and abilities can, when they're gifted, it's like, they just can hide like the things that are hard for them, right?
Mhm.
Or it looks different. There is interesting research that has shown basically that like gifted, I think it's mostly with kids and teens, like gifted kids and teens, um, like they don't perform in the like quote unquote like impaired or disabled range on the assessments that are considered the gold standard for each of those things. So for example, like gifted ADHDers can do an ADHD assessment. They do like a task that's supposed to measure if a kid can manage their attention, and they perform in the average range because
Mhm.
they are like, I can do this for 2 minutes, like, and I like to perform well, and I like new challenging tasks, and I'm going to
Mhm.
do it. Right. And they can almost like outperform themselves or like override the ADHD difficulties in the moment. But then they'll go in for an assessment and they'll say, like, oh, this kid isn't ADHD. Look, they performed
Mhm.
average or like a little below average in all of these. But it's much more important to like talk to the parents, to talk to the kid, to understand what it looks like in real life, how it feels to do certain tasks.
Mhm.
because the same thing is true of kind of things that are considered the gold standard of autism. Autistic gifted kids usually perform in the average range, but when you look at qualitative differences and just
Yeah.
how they approach life, how they socialize, you
Mhm.
can see that. And actually, Dr. Donna Henderson is actually good research for understanding autism because she talks a lot and has trainings about less obvious presentations of autism. And she always says it's important to look at the subjective experience. So you're not just looking at behavior, because like you're
Mhm.
saying, right, it's like, well, the behavior is more or less in the okay range, right? Or like
Yeah.
it's not
Yeah.
as noticeable. So
Yeah,
yeah,
for sure. Yeah, and I think that's like, as you said, not all providers are used to diagnosed twice
right.
exceptional kids, and it's a lot of nuance in, and correct me if I'm wrong, but things can get more obvious as the expectation increase when the kids are getting older. So it might
Yeah.
not show up in an assessment as 7 year old, but it might show at 14, for example.
Yes, yes, yeah, absolutely. Well, and there's a lot of adults who are recognizing their own,
Mhm.
that they're autistic or that they have ADHD once their kid has been assessed,
Yeah.
or, it doesn't get identified until that person like becomes a parent and they're like,
Mhm.
oh, this really exceeds my capacity now. Like I could
Yeah.
always work really hard and I didn't think I had ADHD until the demands became too high. And now I realize that I've been compensating and coming up with all these strategies, So yeah, sometimes it's at the transition to middle school, at the transition to high school or college
Hmm.
or first job or having a kid, that you can see the challenges or the things that are stressful become more obvious.
Hmm. Okay, great.
Um,
Um, we'll have you over again later for more how to deal with those kids. So,
Sure, sure.
but if there anything about um how to identify them or like something related to that that you want to
Yeah.
add before we finish this one.
So I guess I'll just say, in addition to like emotional intensity being assigned to me, that I would be curious about twice exceptionality.
Mhm.
The other things that stand out as really common, if you know your kid is bright, or if you're pretty sure, they're bright or gifted, and then some signs of potential twice exceptionality would also just be things like having a hard time with routines and transitions. Like I hear from families all the time that like the morning routine or the bedtime routine are really tough or long or difficult, right? Or if hygiene tasks are difficult, or if things like if your kid is a really selective eater or has a hard time sleeping, or if they have a lot of medical conditions, like all those things are more common for ADHDers and autistic kids. So
Mhm.
those are just other things that parents would have noticed about their kids, but maybe didn't know were potentially
Yeah,
related to being twice exceptional. So
yeah.
those are some other common ones. Or if they're really having a hard time at school or hate school or there's something that's not working there, it's worth looking into also.
Yeah. You're kind of
Oh.
describing my kids to a T right now.
You're like, check, check,
Yeah.
yes, all those things, all those things. Yeah, or if they're constantly negotiating with you and fighting or saying mean things, like those are all this kind of like
Uh-huh.
hyper reactivity. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So
We were kind of the autistic description, and then that's more the ADHDers now.
yeah, yeah, and there can be
There's a
so much
mix, but
overlap. Yeah, so
yes,
it's
yes,
hard to
there's a mix,
know.
but
But
yeah.
yes, yes, exactly.
Definitely the like arguing is often more the ADHD tendencies.
Yeah. Although but PDA autistics, that's one
True.
that I hear a lot of like constant negotiation. They're always arguing, they're always telling me no, and that makes me wonder about PDA too, because that like
Yeah, true.
pervasive drive for autonomy. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's where it gets tricky, where it's like you can learn and then you could always look for an assessment provider who understands these things where you could get more clarity and go
Yeah.
really in depth.
Yeah, for
So
sure.
yeah.
Yeah. PDA
Yeah.
is another thing that we like I need to find a guest to talk about that because I've had a few requests.
I would love to talk about that if you
Oh,
want.
another topic you could talk about. Great.
Yes,
I'll note that
yes.
down. So
No, that
thank you
sounds
very
great.
much. Where can people can find you if they want to learn more and work with you?
Sure. Yeah, so my coaching company is called the Gifted Learning Lab, and the website is giftedlearninglab.com. I have a free weekly email. There's a button to subscribe if people want to get a weekly email about parenting, and there's a free course, to reduce power struggles with your gifted or 2E kid also. There's a freebie on
That's
there.
a big one.
Yeah, yeah.
Great. Thank you. I'm going to put the link to that in the show notes for sure.
Awesome.
Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
I'm so glad you joined me today and took that time out of your intense life to focus on finding a new way to parent that works for you and your kids. To get the episodes as soon as they drop, make sure to subscribe to the podcast. And please leave a rating and review so other parents can find it too. Also, check out all the free resources on my website at familymoments.ca so you can take action on what's the most important for you right now. And take a deep breath, keep going. We're all in this together.